back to what I was talking about. Yeah, the drama triangle. The reason I'm going to talk about the drama triangle tonight is I've had quite a few requests over the past year to talk about it. Um, I had been meaning to do it, but then someone had mentioned it when I'd put out the post about the live stream, and I was taking suggestions. So I thought now would be as good a time as any. Now, the drama triangle, it's a concept that was developed through a counseling modality known as transactional analysis by a guy named Stephen Karpman. And it looks at the different dynamics we go through in our relationships. And I think it's quite interesting. We would go through this in our different relationships with different people. But again, a lot of the people that watch my channel were really asking about questions like toxic relationships. And I think it's quite an interesting, perhaps even an important dynamic when you're looking at difficult toxic relationships, because the drama triangle can be quite an unhealthy dynamic. So if you think of a triangle, it's got three corners, and in those three corners, there are different roles. The first role would be a rescuer. That's the sort of person who likes to help. Good people do good things. The other corner of the triangle, you have what's known as a persecutor. And the persecutor, they believe they're right. It's everybody else's fault. They are right. They are justified. And then at the bottom of the triangle, you have a role known as victim. The victim believes I am helpless or I am innocent. So you have these three different dynamics. And the thing is, we may have a default set. We may go to one of these automatically. We may be a rescuer. We may want to help, but we still go round and round that triangle in our different interactions and with different people, just like they go round it as well. Sometimes we would even go round this triangle, even in one conversation in our own head. So being on the drama triangle, it can be a conscious thing. We do it consciously. It can also be an unconscious thing. We do it automatically. We do it without thinking. So I'm going to break down this evening. We're going to break down the different roles, how they interact with each other. I'm going to break down what goes on internally with someone, what might be going on with the other person as well, how sometimes people can push us into the role. We get pushed into the role of victim, or we get pushed into the role of rescuer. I'm going to be looking at some ideas as well on how to break free from that triangle. Once you recognize you're on the triangle, the question is, how do you get off it? Okay, and I think the key is recognizing you're on it in the first place. So I'm going to look first of all at the rescuer. Now, as I said, someone who maybe their default setting is to rescue someone. They like to help people. They don't like seeing people in distress. They don't like contention. They like to smooth things over. They like to bring out the best in people. And at their core, you would have someone who, as I said, they believe they're good. Good people do good things. Rescuers sometimes struggle with the difference between a good thing and the right thing. It's not always the right thing to try to rescue someone. There is a difference between supporting and fixing, trying to rescue. There is a difference. But they like to feel valued. They like to feel as if they're needed. So there's something going on with the rescuer. They feel it. I'm okay if you're okay. It can be the sort of person who puts other people's needs in front of their own. And the sort of things they might be saying are things like, here, let me help you. Let me do that for you. You might also get another dynamic where they like to take control, where it's here, let me do that for you. You can't do it on your own. Or you look as if you're struggling. Let me take over. So there is a kind of rescuing, but it's almost like taking responsibility for the other person. The rescuer's personality, I think a lot of the time it might be the first person to offer to help, the first person to volunteer, the first person to jump in. They like to see others happy. As I say, they don't like to see them struggling. They might think they know what's best. They might think they know what the best solution is. and it might be based on their own frame of reference. They might also sometimes get a bit frustrated because they might be with someone and it doesn't matter what they suggest, nothing seems to work. So they get a bit frustrated. If they would just do what I say, if they do it the way I say it, things would be fine. They wouldn't be struggling like this. They like to help others feel better about themselves. They like to help others feel superior, to improve their situation. And a lot of the time, it might be at their own cost. To say, not always recognizing the difference between a good thing and the right thing. They might say things like, again, to pacify people, bit of people pleasing. They might say things like, I agree with you and I think you're right. And isn't that awful what happened to you? And all of that sort of thing. So there's a lot of agreeing. They don't generally, sometimes they don't like conflict. So they will always try to pacify, always trying to appease. Then on the other side of that, you get the persecutor. Now, the persecutor, as I said, at their core, they believe I am right. It's everybody else's fault. Some persecutors might actually think they're being assertive. They might think that's an attractive quality. Actually, more often than not, it tends to alienate people. They would be the villain, the tormentor, a lot of sarcasm, jokes with jags, things like that. They might meet someone who is a victim, if you will. If not, they will try to make them a victim, maybe, because the persecutor will often feel better about themselves if they're feeling better than others. I think sometimes that's what we see with narcissism, the sense of entitlement and so on. A lot of people would say the persecutor is often the narcissist. Not necessarily so, because they can be all three. They tend to criticize and blame a lot. They tend to project a lot of their own stuff onto other people. They tend to dump things onto other people, not in the same way the victim does, but dump it onto them for them to fix, them to sort out. But then you get the victim. And the victim, at their very, I suppose, their core, they could believe one of two things. Either I am innocent, it's nothing to do with me. I was just standing there when this happened. I'm innocent, or the person wants to get rescued, the person tries to reel people in, to help them, to fix them, to support them. They don't really take a lot of responsibility for themselves. It's up to other people to make their lives better. They are flawed, they are weak, they are powerless. When you get people in these dynamics, you get a victim, they might meet a rescuer. The rescuer has someone, they have a project, they have someone to bring out the best in. Sometimes you get the persecutor will meet the victim and they will keep them as a victim because that keeps them feeling powerful. Now, to demonstrate how we go round this circle, or this triangle rather, sometimes you might get a rescuer who meets a victim. So they are trying to help them. But no matter what they do, nothing changes. And eventually the victim, it might just grind them down because the answer might be completely obvious. But every answer will have a problem. Every solution will have a problem. Every goal will have an insurmountable obstacle. Every silver lining will have a cloud. It's the sort of person that really can drain the life out of you. The sort of person who, if you just give them this box and said, push that blue button and everything will be fixed, they would look at the box and say, my finger hurts. There will always be a problem. Now, eventually, the rescuer might lose patience. They might snap. And in that moment, they become a persecutor. They start blaming the victim, might shout at the victim, take a bit of responsibility. Then the victim withdraws even further. Now you're hurting me. You know what happened to me and so on. And this would be not unlike a covert narcissism, withdrawn further into themselves. They've now been hurt. But that person starts to feel guilty for being a persecutor because what they did has just hurt the victim. So they immediately jump back into the role of rescuer and try even harder. So there are different ways that we can go round and round in this dynamic. Sometimes we are going to be the rescuer, sometimes we are going to be the persecutor, and sometimes we are the victim. Now, the thing about the victim is the other two don't like being a victim. Persecutor will lash out rather than be a victim. They may, depending, I suppose, if they're manipulative enough, they may become a victim for a moment in order to guilt trip someone into becoming a rescuer. But they generally don't like being a victim. Say it's everybody else's fault and everybody else's responsibility. Rescuers don't necessarily like being victims either, because it's their role in life to help victims. Sometimes they might see a persecutor, but their empathy might kick in and they might think something like, well, that person only behaves like that because they're hurt, because they're wounded. So if I'm nice to them, maybe they'll stop being like that. And sometimes that can be the case. But other times, if you're dealing with someone who's quite toxic, as soon as that person starts behaving like that, oh, hold on, you're putting me into the role of victim here. That's not happening. And so they lash out. Round and round we go. Okay? The persecutor's personality is very disparaging, very scornful of other people. They can be aggressive, they can be passive aggressive. They, as I say, they like to feel good about themselves by feeling better than others. So they tend to persecute them. They can be quite envious. They can be jealous. They can be controlling. They're very judgmental and critical. They discount others. Very scornful of other people, even being, their values, their integrity, even being loyal to them. Let's say they can be quite controlling by nature as well. The victim, they can be quite self-deprecating. They disparage themselves. They're always weak. They tend to behave as if they are inferior. They feel inferior. Everybody else is so much better at this. Everybody else can do this, and I can't. There's also a sense of unfairness there as well. There can be a little bit of envy there. They tend to be both helpless and hopeless. A lot of low mood, a lot of anxiety going on there. They complain a lot. They're very downtrodden. They've been treated unfairly. Sometimes it's almost like a childlike helplessness, and it's always yearning for someone to come and rescue them, to come and help them. Probably not a nice way of putting it, but sometimes they might behave as if they're just an innocent bystander in their own life. Other things tend to happen. It's got nothing to do with them. It's like they have no agency. Um, so everything is very unfair. Nothing works out. And round we go in that dynamic. Now, you might have someone, and yes, they're going to be on that triangle, as indeed we are in quite a few of our relationships. We get the other person. And this is what I said at the beginning about how sometimes we push people or they push us into certain roles. So you might meet a persecutor and they push you into the role of victim. Because again, they only feel powerful if someone else feels weak. Or you might meet a victim and they want to push someone into the role of rescuer. Come and make my life better. Look at how miserable it is. I have no control here. You can also meet someone who is a rescuer and they will put someone into the role of victim because they know best. They can help. They can sort this out. They can do that. In terms of toxic relationships, and I talked about narcissism earlier, people tend to assume that the persecutor is the narcissist. They can be all three. Covert narcissism, for instance, victimhood. Altruistic narcissism, rescuer. Grandiose narcissism, the persecutor. The other person, they can go through all three as well. Because again, you're trying to help someone, you're trying to bring out the best in them, you're trying to make things better for yourself, for the relationship, for the workplace, whatever. You losing patience, losing resources, losing time. So we become the persecutor. Now, maybe not to the person's face, but we might maybe gossip, we might grind our teeth, we might see the bit. They turn on us, they give us a hard time. We go into the role of victim. So round and round we go. And as I say, sometimes we get pushed into these different roles. The reason for this triangle is recognizing how we interact not just with the other people, but sometimes with ourselves as well. Because sometimes in our internal dialogues, we're reflecting on something that happened to us, something somebody said to us, and we feel like a victim. It was unkind, it was cruel, it was horrible, whatever it was, but we don't like feeling a victim. So we start to become the persecutor. Now, even if that's in an internal dialogue, or we may be the persecutor. We might be saying how stupid they are, how silly they are, how reckless they are, but then we feel bad about it. Our guilt kicks in. So we start to think, well, how can I help them? So again, then we try to become, rather, even in that internal dialogue, we try to become a rescuer. Let's move on to the next bit. When we look at some of the negative beliefs that go around that, I think at the core of all three is this lack of responsibility. And what I mean by that is the persecutor doesn't take any responsibility. It's everybody else's fault. It's up to everybody else to fix it. It's got nothing to do with me. I am right. I am justified. I am noble. I am righteous, whatever. The rescuer doesn't take responsibility for themselves. Quite often, the rescuer takes responsibility for everybody else. Again, putting everybody else's needs in front of their own. Believing other people are more important. Or I'm only of value if I'm helping someone. Remember, good people do good things. If I'm not doing good things, I mustn't be a good person. So they're taking responsibility for other people, not so much themselves. The victim doesn't take responsibility for themselves. To take responsibility for themselves would mean change. And change can be frightening, even at the best of times for a lot of people. But for someone with that kind of mentality, that means having to take responsibility, take a sense of agency, taking a sense of control in their own lives. So it's so much easier to give that responsibility to other people. So if you recognize at the core of all three is this responsibility. Darren, could you expand upon how dominance and control are forms of psychological abuse? I have, sorry, just this caught my eye. I have talked about in different videos the nature of psychological abuse, emotional abuse. There's a lot of stuff there if you want to check those out. What I will say, dominance and control in psychological abuse. How will I phrase this? It's disempowering someone. It's putting someone into the victim role. You're weak and you're helpless. The domineering person, they become the persecutor, taking away that person's agency, taking away that person's choices. There is a lot more to it than that, but as I said, I have made videos. If you want to check those out, I go into in a little more depth. The psychological, it's rewriting someone's narrative, it's taking away their autonomy, it's leading someone to believe that, sorry, I just close this down here. It's leading someone to believe they are not capable of making their own decisions. Someone else, I mean, there's more to it than that, but the other person has much more control. They deserve the control better. So where did I get to? What was I talking about? This is what happens. I go off on tangents and I'll lose my place. Yeah, I'm talking about those the negative beliefs and the responsibility. There is a lack of responsibility on all three parts. With two of them, they give everybody else the responsibility. It is someone else's. With the other, they take responsibility for other people. So in order to get off the triangle, I think it begins with recognizing you're on it in the first place. For instance, are you the sort of person who jumps into rescue, jumps into fix, offers a solution? Do you struggle with boundaries? Do you struggle with saying no? Do you recognize the difference between a good thing and the right thing? It's like that old expression, it's the difference between giving someone a fish and teaching them how to fish. Because sometimes whenever we try to, the more we try to help someone, sometimes we're actually enabling them. Sometimes we're enabling that victim to stay where they are. Why would they have to change? Other people are going to sort it out. The persecutor, they don't necessarily have to change because what they're doing works for them. Everybody else will take the responsibility. Everybody else will take the blame. For the rescuer, taking responsibility for themselves, learning to say no, learning the difference between supporting and fixing, learning the difference between caring about and caring for. For the persecutor, learning the difference, taking a bit of responsibility, going from something like it's your fault, just dumping everything out there. It's your fault. You can't do anything right. Just a lot of blame shifting. To recognize their own responsibility. Now, sometimes their own responsibility might just be something as trivial as they happen to turn up, but they still have responsibility. They also have responsibility for their own actions, for the things they do, for the things they say, and for the impact they have on other people. Not the same as saying they own it, but they do still have responsibility. They still have levels of responsibility. For the victim to take responsibility, there's a difference between being vulnerable and being a victim. There's no shame in being vulnerable. We all have vulnerabilities. Tonight, technology is my vulnerability. I'm still living in the analog age. The fact that I can hit the button to make this work is a miracle to me anyway. There's nothing wrong with being vulnerable, but that does not necessarily make someone a victim. People still have a sense of agency. So recognizing that difference, recognizing taking that responsibility, we can change. Now, what we can't do is we can't change other people. Okay. And this is the difficult thing whenever you're in a relationship with a toxic person. The most we can ever do is influence someone. That, I think, that's as much as we can do. But when we recognize someone else in that role and we start to take our own responsibility, but allow them to take theirs, they're going to have to take theirs. We can't do it for them. That's when we can ask different questions. That's when we can ask questions, recognizing our own boundaries. We can ask questions like to the victim, rather than "Can I help you?" We can ask what seems to be the problem. We can ask what are your options? What are your choices? Just get them to do their own thinking. If they need help, let them ask, and it's not for us to say no. Maybe it is a genuine request. When it comes to the persecutor, again, this is not about antagonizing someone, okay? And you don't do this unless you're not safe. You do it only if you feel comfortable enough and if you feel safe. It's like the persecutor will say something like, "You're stupid," which isn't a bad word until you're called it. And then it's crushing. We can go into the victim role, or we can come into the rescue role. We can try and make them feel better so they won't call us stupid. Or we could just ask them, "What do you mean by stupid? Give me an example of when I've been stupid. How does that make it stupid?" Now, again, we're not trying to be aggressive. We're not trying to be passive aggressive. I call it the Columbo approach. Just keep asking questions, because sooner or later you'll get to what's really going on. With the rescuer as well, someone is trying to rescue us. They keep doing things for us that we don't need. Sometimes they're doing things for us that leave us in a worse situation. Sometimes they're trying to do things that we are more than capable of doing ourselves, and we end up feeling guilty because they get offended when we say no. We have to sometimes learn to sit with that discomfort, to tell someone, "Thank you for your help, but I really don't need it." Or to return something that was very kind of you, but I don't need that right now, or I didn't ask for that, or whatever. Again, we can be assertive, we can be nice, we can, we can have good manners. Good manners don't cost anything. But we can still be assertive. We can still be clear and concise. When people start to recognize that, sometimes that does generate a change. Other times you'll just get someone who will ramp it up a gear, that will try and push us into the role. But again, it's recognizing it. We can, instead of being, how will I put this? I'm trying to think of the guy. What do you call the guy? He came up with, let me see. Because I was looking at this earlier. Yeah, a guy called AC Choi back in the 1990s. He came up with a triangle. He called it the winner's triangle. Pardon me. Where you can move from being the rescuer to being a caring person, which I think is very, it's a lovely way of putting it. Remember I said on a previous live stream, the difference between caring about and caring for. We can be a caring person rather than a rescuer who's jumping in. We can encourage them to be a caring person. We recognize maybe it's coming from a good place, but it's not quite what we need. From a persecutor, you go to being assertive. Now, we can be assertive without being aggressive. We can be stern, but we can still be kind. We can take the criticism. This is what I say about asking questions. Sometimes you might get to the root of what's really going on. Someone might have something to say. They're just incredibly poor at how they do it. So the more you ask them, the more you might get to it. Other than that, you're just dealing with a toxic person who's just going to throw insult after insult or try to shut it down because they can't deal with that. But at least you know what you're dealing with. And rather than being a victim, it's moving to being vulnerable. And as I said, there's no shame in being vulnerable. We all have vulnerabilities, every single one of us. Unless, of course, you're Superman or something. But even then, he's got his kryptonite. So it's moving from, I suppose, one triangle to another. You're taking responsibility. You're allowing others to take theirs. There's challenging, not blaming, not fault finding. There's problem solving, and there's the supporting. There's caring about rather than caring for. That's a very rushed kind of overview of the drama triangle. I'm just curious. I'm going to look at the comments now. People are too close to the mic. Could be. I'm just wondering, is the triangle something that people might recognize in their own dynamics? It's something I would recognize and something I keep having to recognize myself because, as I say, it's something we might do unconsciously. We slip into it. We have that need to fix, or there's that little bit of us that sometimes is a little bit scathing at someone, or there's that part of us that we feel that no matter what we do, nothing's going to change. So we can go around that triangle. So I'm going to have a look. Narcissists are obsessed with winning. Earn it back when I said winner or winning. Yeah, it's all about winning at any cost. Sometimes it's even a scorched earth. It doesn't matter what the cost is. I'll give you a really funny example of narcissists and winning. I thought this was hilarious, and it was in a comedy TV show. It was these two guys, and they were constantly playing one-upmanship. And one of them just one day said, lifted a jar of coffee, and he says, "I bet you I could eat this whole jar of coffee." And the other guy's looking at him, going, "Yeah, okay, work away, pal." And he did. He ate this jar of freeze-dried coffee, and you could see it, albeit it was a TV show, you could see he was retching and his eyes were burning, and he pretty much ate the whole jar of coffee. And then afterwards he says, "You see, didn't I tell you? Didn't tell you could win?" And the other guy's sitting there quite calmly going, "Yep, the important thing is you won." So yeah, there are people out there. It doesn't matter what it is. It doesn't matter how ridiculous it is. It's all about winning. If they're going to eat a jar of coffee, let them win. What can I say? Abuser swims around the triangle all by herself. That's not uncommon. That's what I say. We go around this ourselves. Sometimes you go around it in the interaction. Sometimes you get someone and they will switch from all three. If being a victim doesn't work, if it doesn't get them what they want, then they might switch to persecutor. How dare you not fix me? How dare you not do this for me? They can even go to rescuer as well. We sometimes watch as they try to rescue someone else. while we're floundering. So yeah, that's not uncommon that people go around that. Hey Mac, I recognize it in myself. Yeah, when we recognize, I believe awareness is a very powerful thing. It always gives us a choice. It moves, in psychological terms, it moves from the unconscious into the conscious. We're no longer doing it automatically. We have a choice. We can go into that role. Maybe in that situation, it's what's needed. Who knows? Or we could choose something else. Awareness is always a very powerful thing. Manage our life when we get helping those who don't take for granted others' presence in their life. There is something in that. I'm just going to paraphrase what you were asking or what you were saying, Barbara. A lot of rescuers do find them being taken for granted. It's always assumed they are going to fix, they are going to give up, they're going to concede a bit more, they're going to give up their resources, they will always put someone first. They can get taken for granted, yeah. And when they get taken for granted, sometimes they find themselves going into the victim role when they realize they're being taken for granted, because they're forgetting their own assertiveness, their own boundaries. When they go into the role of victim, remember, they don't like going into the role of victim. Neither does the persecutor. They don't like going into the role of victim. So what happens is then they become the persecutor. Then they will, curse the person, they'll swear at them, they'll maybe get angry with them, or they might even get angry with themselves. So yeah, there is something about being taken for granted. Characters themselves as competitive, cute, and your 6-year-old sad when they're 50. I'm in my 50s. But yeah, I think we characterize ourselves in different ways. So when you say teaching ethics is a big transition from codependent enabler to responsible and increasing understanding. Yeah, again, it's the key is responsibility. It's not just taking responsibility for ourselves, our own actions, our own choices, our own behaviors. We have to allow other people to take responsibility for themselves as well, even if they're asking for help, even if they are vulnerable and we can discern, yeah, maybe they do need help, maybe they do need a bit of support, but allowing them the responsibility to change and to learn and to grow. Remember, there are some what's known as maybe altruistic narcissists who get their supply from people admiring how generous they are, how virtuous they are, how noble they are, how kind they are. So sometimes they find people who want, doesn't matter if they need help or not, they will find them and they will try to make them a victim just so that they get to look good. Can some narcissists become psychopaths? There is a school of thought that psychopaths aren't so much made. Sociopaths would be made. Psychopaths are more born. It's more a genetic thing. They gather the flying monkeys to help them. Quite often, the really good point, Mama Boot Bam. When they're recruiting their flying monkeys, they're often in victim mode. On that triangle, they have moved to victim. Look at what this person did to me. Look at how this person has hurt me. I don't feel safe. I need information on that person, and they've blocked me. Will you keep an eye on them for me? And it's often done from a sense of victimhood. A lot of flying monkeys, a lot of agents, not all of them certainly, but a lot of them, I believe, would be quite innocent. They're naive. They don't quite know the full story. They haven't heard the full story, so they would use the victim mode in order to recruit them. You're insulting psychopaths. Haven't seen it in this way before and needed to take responsibility to change and walk away from what's not healthy. When we're walking away from what's not healthy, sometimes that is the best course of action. Yeah, sometimes we need to be honest with why it's unhealthy. It could be unhealthy for both parties. It could be unhealthy for you. Sometimes it could be unhealthy for them because unwittingly, if you're in the role of rescuer, remember, we don't always know the difference between a good thing and the right thing. We think we're doing the right thing. We're not. We're just doing a good thing, something that we think will make us feel better. Walking away from something that's unhealthy, whatever it is you do, you make sure you're safe. Have as much support around you as you can. Get whatever advice you can need. sometimes you're just dealing with someone who's a pest. Other times you might be dealing with someone who's very malignant and very vindictive. So whatever it is you do, you always make sure you're safe. Haven't seen it this way before either. Okay, thank you, Darren. How do I stop my parents from phoning me daily? That is a question I could not answer. There are different ways. You said you've blocked them. If you've blocked them, if you've changed your number, if people want to try to find you, they will. Unfortunately, people find each other on social media. They'll try and contact you through someone else. It's more about how you manage your boundaries than maybe continually having to manage your boundaries. So I'd like the persecutor actually taking the victim's role by blaming. Yeah, that's the manipulation side. It's a a manipulative element of things like narcissism and the dark personality. They go into whatever role they have to. Sometimes they will go into the role of rescuer in order to get them what they want. I think in the triangle, I think, and these are just my thoughts, I could be wrong. I think sometimes we have what's known as a default setting. It's if we're on that triangle, it's the first one we always go to. For someone, it might be persecutor. That's their default setting. But it's not to say they don't go to the other two from time to time. They either get pushed into it or they have to move into it in order to get them what they want. Reason I show my face not to be found online. A lot of people are like that. Gamer Girl Alex, a lot of people use avatars. I use my face. It's the only one I've got. I just use this one. People want to find me, they'll find me. I generally don't engage with people who are rude and nasty. I don't mind answering questions, and if people tell me I'm wrong, by all means, I'll listen to them because they could well be right. But it's different if there's toxic, difficult people out there who are deliberately trying to find you. And sometimes this is the thing about the internet. Sometimes anonymity can be a bit of a pest because people can annoy you, troll you through anonymous accounts. But sometimes it's a good thing because it keeps us safe. We use an avatar and we use maybe a username or something. We still get the contact with other people. We can still get to see what's going on in the world. Rescued by default, but get pushed into the persecutor and then pushed hard enough, and he's usually the victim. Again, that's a sense of manipulation. Sometimes someone will push you into the role of persecutor, like a victim will push you into the role of persecutor if you will not be rescuer enough for them. Because you're unkind, because you're cruel, because, you know, the word no is the cruelest, horriblest word anyone could ever use. So it's almost like they push you into the role. They can push someone into the role of persecutor. That plays on their guilt, plays on their shame, plays on their compassion and so on. And they feel bad about it, so they go back to the role of rescuer. So got time for one more, and have to block physically move house. Okay. As always, this is the drama triangle in a bit of a nutshell. There is a lot more to it than that. I was trying to talk about it in the context of relationships with difficult people, with toxic people, with narcissistic people. Not just that we can go into that role, but they do as well. And sometimes we go round and round in our interactions. Sometimes we will go in these interactions in the workplace. We will do it online. We will do it with our family, with our friends. Sometimes, as I say, it's an unconscious thing. Other times it is a conscious thing. We do it. We just know what we're doing. We do it because maybe we've always done it. To get off it, as I say, it's about taking responsibility and allowing others to take responsibility. Now, I don't have all the details in front of me, but I am going to leave you with, if you want to look this up yourself, it's looking at the winner's triangle. The guy that came up with it is a guy called A.C. Choi, and it was back in 1990. And as I say, it's moving from being persecutor to being assertive. It's moving from being a rescuer to being a caring person. And it's moving from being a victim to recognizing your vulnerability. Don't forget, with our vulnerability, keep saying this, with our vulnerability, we still have strengths. Anybody that watched the very first live stream I ever did, I talked about solution finding questions and solution finding approaches to some of our problems. It's recognizing there are always exceptions, and recognizing if we struggle in one area, if you will, a vulnerability, if we pay attention to other areas where maybe we are quite confident, then we could look at what's going on there. What could I take from there that can compensate for this? Drawing on our own inner resources. So there's not necessarily anything wrong with being vulnerable. Other people, toxic people, might try and exploit that vulnerability. But again, with our boundaries, recognizing our boundaries, which I think I talked about a few weeks ago, with our boundaries, they can certainly try. It's up to us whether or not they get through. So, come to the end of this evening. As always, I hope you got something out of this. I'm sorry about the way this went earlier on, but I was kind of relieved to hear that there's been 3 live streams today that have had no sound. So maybe it wasn't just me. Could be, though. And you're entitled to help, Sean. Yeah. Yeah. We all need help. And I think that the thing about help is it's where we ask for it. I think sometimes we think we need it from a certain person, from a certain place. And maybe we do. Maybe we do. What I'll say is what I say in a lot of videos when I'm talking about different kinds of abuse, and sometimes I do the live streams as well. Look for whatever kind of advice and guidance you can get. Sometimes talking to a life coach, sometimes talking to a counselor. If that's not available, there's support groups for people. There's different areas. There may be support groups for anxiety, low mood, things like that. There's a lot of online resources. There's a lot of Facebook pages, things like that. Like-minded people have all been through the same sort of thing. There are a lot of people on YouTube. The one I keep on saying is Jay Reid, who have online resources to help people who have been in difficult, toxic situations and relationships. Utilize whatever help and support you can get. It is out there. Sometimes we have to look for it. Sometimes we have to go digging for it, but there is help and support out there. Sometimes there's organizations, depending on where you live, there's organizations may have helplines. You just ring someone up and there's someone at the end of the phone can give you a little bit of guidance. Jay Reid, Patrick T. Hen, Little Human are great. Yeah, I've started to watch The Little Shaman recently. Yeah, some of her stuff's very, very good. Yeah, she's picking up on a lot of the dark personality stuff as opposed to just narcissism, which is something I would talk about, but she does it very, very well. Very clear, very concise. She's got a really good channel. What else? I really appreciate your challenge, player narcissistic family playlist. Do you know, on the narcissistic family playlist, there are 2 things I haven't done yet. One was the only child in a narcissistic family, about sometimes the different roles they get pushed into. So there's that, the only child. And then there's narcissistic siblings. The question I'm wondering is more about looking at them when they're growing up. I was just asked if I would talk about narcissistic siblings. So I will talk about them as they grow up, because the dynamics are a bit different. So there are 2 videos that will be coming up soon. And who else have we got? The Royal We. I've heard of the Royal We, but I haven't actually watched the Royal We yet. This is funny for me to be on YouTube. I don't get to watch a lot of YouTube. The most of YouTube I would watch, I think you'd probably find quite boring. Never heard of Little Shaman. Little Shaman's good, yes. A lot of people are recommending it. I've said I would watch it as well. The Royal We, maybe I will check out. See what's going on. So listen, thanks very much for joining me again this evening. Glad I got it up and running in the end. There is more to look at if you want to look at the drama triangle. There's a lot of stuff online. people explain it better than I do. I think about it, as I say, in terms of the dynamics, the different relationships with each other, as well as what's going on in our head. As always, I'm going to put up the next one will be on a Sunday, because I said I would alternate them. So the next one will be Sunday week. And again, I will put out a request. Anything you want me to talk about, I will put it together and we'll take it from there. So thanks again, everybody. Have a really nice evening. Bye now.